Welcome, Lisa. How are you?
Hey Nathan, great to see you again. Always fun to hang out with you.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. How's your week been so far? All good?
So far, so good, but I run human resources for multiple companies, so there's no way it's all good.
Good stuff, good stuff. For everyone watching, Lisa has a HR company. She's a fractional chief HR officer for multiple different cyber security and data businesses HQ'd all across the US. Feel free to introduce yourself, Lisa. I know LinkedIn does exist, but yeah, give yourself a bit of an overview.
Absolutely. Well, I have well over 20 years of experience helping to build the HR functions and HR teams for startup technology companies all over the country and even global companies. And a couple of years ago, I decided to move out on my own and started a consulting firm where I'm able to work with multiple companies at a time. So you hit the nail on the head, Nathan. That's exactly what I'm doing, helping technology based and particularly in the data and cybersecurity spaces, startup companies with their growth.
Yeah, and how did it all start? How did you actually originally get into the world of HR, internal recruiting, all that sort of stuff? Where did it all take off, I guess?
That's become such an interesting question because now there are so many university programs and it really, you think of HR as a strong, real career path. But back, as I like to say, 20 something, closer to 30 years ago when I started, a lot of the HR people tripped into HR. It wasn't really where we started. I was actually recruited into a recruiting firm and started as an office manager in a recruiting firm, shifted into recruiting. And at one point, I was asked to go on site at a client to help them with their recruiting needs. Well, as soon as I went on site, I realized, ooh, I want a bigger role than this. And I really love being inside the companies. So that's what I did for a number of years and how I moved from recruiting into HRs. When you work with the smaller companies, they just ask the recruiters HR questions. Ultimately, I went back to school and studied and learned more about HR and like I said, expanded my career there, grew a number of companies, and then decided to go back out on my own.
Yeah, I was looking over your background as well before you started off on your own. One of your most senior positions was at Data World, wasn't it? Where you were very senior in HR. Talk to me around the 4 years there, and then what actually led you to go from being a very senior HR leader within a large data business into, going, I want to work with multiple businesses and set up on my own.
Yeah. So Data World was a fun ride, actually. I was there for a while and helped grow that company. It was 20 something people when I started there. And when I left, it was over 150, if I'm not mistaken. Built a fantastic team. We won a number of culture and diversity related awards and recognition during my time there. And so my opportunity to go out on my own was really the culmination of all of my experience in building out a number of organizations, and being able to pass on that experience to companies, and particularly startup companies who so often get it wrong early. They don't spend the money or consider the repercussions or the requirements and kind of the value, if you will, of the HR and the people function often until it's too late. They've tripped on a compliance issue or they've got a turnover problem, and then they call us in to fix the problem. And so by working in a fractional capacity, those early stage startups can afford and can work with strategic HR to help build up the foundational HR functions, help create and define and cultivate the culture and the employee engagement that they want so that they're building the right way to begin with. And so being able to kind of spread that knowledge and that opportunity.
Yeah, interesting. What sort of challenges do some of these early stage startups across data and security have on the HR side of things? Because obviously everyone thinks of the classic problems, which is just getting revenue on the board, getting sales in, but no one really thinks too deep about the things which actually happen internally that you obviously go in and solve. So talk to me about some of them issues which you obviously come in and help with.
Absolutely. And it's funny, Nathan, because one of the things I've said forever is if you've worked for one startup company, you've worked for one startup company, because they are all so uniquely different. And so where we've got, there are trends, and there are some things that have, one company might be similar to another company's issues or problems or even successes. They are also uniquely different. And that's what's fun about working with startups, is really getting in and understanding what's happening in their world. What are their goals? How do they want to build? What is their trajectory? What philosophically are they looking to create as they build a company? And of course, it starts with that senior leadership, with the initial founders and initial builders, and what their ideals are as they grow their companies. And then the challenges become ensuring that they are consistent in that, ensuring that they've got the buy-in and the engagement of the team members who are going to be right by their sides and right behind them, building for them. So the challenges can vary from things like overspending in certain positions and not having budget for the actual functional needs of the company. Some of the challenges we've seen are hiring the wrong people, right? We want to work with our friends until we work with our friends sometimes, for example. It might be not paying attention to the things that are important to the new employees as new team members come on board, whether that's benefits or information that they're getting or not getting about the company, and the plans and the strategy, really feeling tied to the organization. It could be that we have a compensation problem across the board. I've definitely run into compliance issues. This is something we trip on a lot in startups, that, I've got a buddy who's running my payroll kind of thing, but
Yeah.
but we're not, we aren't necessarily setting everything up the right way or doing the right reporting. Especially because as so many companies have become fully remote, or have multi-locations, and people can work where they want, there are compliance requirements in every area and territory and region. Sometimes even municipalities and specific cities have rules, laws, and regulations we have to follow and comply with. And so we see a lot of tripping up on that in early stages too.
Yeah, interesting. You make a point there on a bad hire, which a lot of sales leaders in my network will definitely have had experience before. How costly have you seen a bad hire to actually be, especially to an early stage business?
There are so many metrics and so much data around the cost of turnover and the cost of a poor hire. And the reality is that the poor hire cost can really range significantly based on the role and the latitude that person has had, right? If they made decisions that have impacted the company negatively, um, based on the length of time that it takes us to identify the poor hire and remove and replace. The actual costs, of course, the hard costs, the salary costs, the benefits costs, the cost of unemployment insurance, the cost of replacement, potentially paying a firm to replace that candidate. Again, there are hard costs involved too. I believe that the average is somewhere around 20 or 30% of the actual cost of hire is the cost of the turnover of that hire, but we've certainly seen it go way beyond that.
Mm, yeah. And you mentioned earlier about expanding into different regions and having all the compliance issues. How difficult is it for businesses to maybe expand from one continent to another, say North America to Europe into APAC, on their own? Like how actually do businesses go about hiring in different regions where there's all those different laws?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting the way you pose the question and how difficult is it? Well, it's not difficult, but it is complicated. So as long as you have the right people who know the right steps and know the questions to ask and know how to put the right things in place, it's not necessarily difficult. But if you decide to embark on those complications yourself, it can absolutely be too complicated and really spin you up. So there are a lot of steps, and it depends. Again, there are different ways that you can set up or create um, operations, if you will, whether that's employment or having a full entity in other countries or other regions. It's really just a matter of understanding what are the right questions, what are those things you have to make sure, what are those boxes you have to make sure you're checking, and working with the right partners. Right? There are a number of international and global employment partners, and it's a matter of selecting the right one for your company's needs. and having the right person internally to partner with them and know those questions to ask, know what to unfold.
Yeah, interesting. I know we've worked together on a couple of positions as businesses expanded into Spain from the US. Hypothetically, I know a really popular hire for businesses I work with is American-based companies who are hiring their first sales rep on the ground in EMEA, who's possibly based in London or Paris. How would a business originally go about that? What would your advice be to them if they're not looking really to set up an entity, they just want to target customers located in the UK or Europe, and they wanted the first boots on the ground in London?
And most of my clients have exactly that situation. As a matter of fact, that is not uncommon, Nathan. So I love that you brought it up. There are, again, it's really about those partners. And so you work with, there are a number of employer of record, EOR organizations. And so we want to partner with the right consulting or EOR firm or party. There are ways, there are other platforms, things like JobVite, that allows you to hire consultants or contractors right through their platform, managing and maintaining the legalities of that piece. It's not just those employment partners, it's also working with and partnering with your own legal entities, whether that's a foreign legal entity or in your own partnership, your own backyard, to ensure that again, you understand all the repercussions, all the risks, and make sure that you're checking off all the boxes and complying with all the requirements out there. But those are the kinds of partners, and how I would typically, not every single time, but typically operate with early boots on the ground, if you will, in other areas. Those initial couple hires in other areas is often through a global EOR, and there are a number of them. There is no one size fits all of those employer of records either. It's really about partnering with the one that makes the most sense for your business needs. So there's, like any other partnership, right? It's about going through the RFP process and analyzing what your needs are, what they've got, and how you can partner best with them.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. How big would you say a business would have to be in terms of employees in a region to go from using an EOR to setting up their actual own entity in that business, in that
Oh
nation?
gosh.
Sorry.
The CFO, the COO, the CEO, and I would all sit down and figure that out as a collective, because it's not just about a cutoff size of shifting to bringing your own entity. It's really about how you're going to grow that company, what the future of that space and that territory means to the ongoing growth of the company. Are you setting your company up for an acquisition and you've created a new complication for that acquisition? Or are you trying to be a global leader and go public in 5 years? And we're going to, dominate this space in this territory, and we really want to establish ourselves there. So really, it's about the strategy, and it's about understanding and following the strategy, understanding our budget constraints, and then making those HR decisions.
Yeah. What would you say to a candidate? Because I've had this a couple of times where some American businesses want to expand into Canada, Mexico, or Europe, and a candidate gets a job letter through an EOR like Deal or Papaya Global, and they get a little bit nervous because they think that Deal are their actual employers or Papaya Global are their actual employers. What would you say to a candidate who's maybe a little bit nervous around going through a third party?
That's right. I even have a client who basically the majority of their team members are consultants or contractors, even independently in different parts of the world. And so really kind of explaining that and the purpose and the value behind it. And that's it. That's exactly it. I'd say, especially in smaller companies, transparency and communication are so critical. So what we want to do is arm the people who are communicating, whether that's the hiring manager, the HR team members and recruiting team members, coworkers or team members who are on the or in the recruiting process, maybe on the interview team, really helping them understand what that setup is and why, the purpose behind it, the value behind it to the company's mission, because everything the company's doing should also impact the team members, right? Our decisions should be about growing a company that you can grow with as well. being the goal. And so it's that clear communication, that transparency of here's why we've created this relationship. Here's the value of it to the organization. Here's how it impacts you and your relationship with both that EOR and the direct company, for example. And I think just good communication and understanding of it typically alleviates or eliminates any of the concerns.
Yeah, yeah, understood. What would you say is the best part of HR leadership and the worst part of HR leadership?
The best thing about human resources is the humans, right? The reality is we have a very interactive role in general. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of pencil pushing and data crunching and all the mechanics and operations of human resources functions as well. But the reality is we are the people who get to be the liaison to the impact of the humans. And so we get to work with the humans as a result. The hardest part about human resources is the humans. Everybody's different. We absolutely have never in the history of the world and never will in the future of the world been able to please all of the people all of the time. There's no such thing. So there is innately that ongoing challenge.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's been very tough for HR in the last maybe 18 months or so as well, with a lot of worldwide redundancies and rifts as well. A lot of that gets pushed onto HR people to deal with, doesn't it? Have you experienced much of that over your career? I'm sure you have. It's not the nice side, is it?
Yeah, definitely. Being the often the figureheads, being those communicators, as I was saying
Mm,
earlier, also has its, it's got its privileges, it's got its honor, it's got its joys, right? I get to announce award winners at companies, but I also have to announce layoffs. And so there's the hard part of it too. The hardest part about that piece of human resources is that often the role gets the blame, right? That's the messenger getting beaten up, of course. And these business decisions are very rarely driven exclusively by human resources. Even what we gave as an example before and talked about, it's operations, it's future planning, it's the strategy of the company that we're following and driving that's leading those decisions. And that's the case for the bad news also. So what we need and what we hope for as human resources leaders is the support and the voice of the full executive leadership team to stand with their decisions, stand with us when we're being the communicators in their decisions. And again, it's going to go back to transparency is really the key. The more and the more frequently we explain and describe and help the team members understand, the more we can, that they'll engage with and understand the decisions, and then we can make better decisions that are good for both the team members and the company.
mm, yeah, for sure. A different question here. You've been working with startups and large businesses over your career, of course. What would you say the main difference is for candidates going to work for large companies and then small companies? And obviously, you now prefer working with the smaller ones, of course. But what are the main differences? And what would you say to a candidate who's maybe considering going to join a large company and going to join a small company?
There are so many differences, and a lot of times it's really about the role within the company. You can find a role in an enterprise, huge company that is challenging, that you're actually making an impact in. And so a lot of people say, I want to work at startups because there's more challenge and I have a bigger impact, but you can find that at enterprise also. There's the other almost misnomer that an enterprise company is more stable, right? I'm scared of a startup because you never know what's going to happen. Well, I got laid off at Sprint, right? There's a bit of a misconception, right? We've seen at the FANG companies, we've seen Apple and Facebook
Microsoft,
and Google and
Amazon, it's
Microsoft
happened a lot recently, hasn't
significant
it?
layoffs, of course. So that's kind of a catch too. It's really about figuring it out for yourself. And I encourage, especially early career folks, to try more than one environment and see where you find your spot and your space. I found mine in startup companies. my friends giggle at me that I'm a glutton for punishment because it is harder, and you are rolling the dice, and it is there are unique challenges to the startup world. Tend to have uh, we tend to have to move faster. We tend to have fewer resources and smaller budgets to do what we need to do. We're often doing the building part, creating programs instead of running them and sustaining them. Uh, but to me, that's the fun part. Other people might really enjoy analyzing existing processes and programs and refining and perfecting them. And so that might be, a larger company might be the right place for them. And so I encourage people to explore rather than to make a decision based on,
Inaccurate sort of
yeah,
guesses,
yeah, what
basically.
might
Yeah.
be inaccurate information. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. I mean, what's your experience with sort of dealing with layoffs then? Because as you mentioned there, over the last 18 months, we've seen loads and loads of layoffs with businesses like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and some of the smaller businesses have made layoffs, of course, but I've definitely noticed a switch from candidates going, I want to join a large business because it's going to be super safe, to candidates going, it's just as dangerous a large company as a smaller one. So I may go in to a smaller one and get some equity and really actually try and make a difference, for example. And, the smaller businesses, you may have a closer relationship to the CEO who ultimately makes these decisions. At a large company, there may be 20 different people between you and the CEO. So, I mean, yeah, have you seen a big difference in the safety of roles in large and small companies over the years?
Not at all. A percentage cut is a percentage cut, right? Is
Mm,
it often feels heavier in a startup company because we know each other's names, right?
mm,
It feels like this community got hit. But I think that anyone who's gone through a significant layoff at an enterprise company would challenge what I just said and say, no, our community was hit too. It hurt just as bad, and it does. And the risks are just as strong in either direction, honestly. And that's exactly what I mean when I say people should find out what energizes them, what brings them interest, and what challenges they want to take on. Because it's just that the scene and the challenges are different, right? If it's someone who really wants that opportunity to be part of the strategy and to grow that way and to have maybe a connection with the C-suite, yeah, you're right. A startup company is going to be more exciting for you. Um, but there are maybe there's someone who really wants to move into leadership, and that enterprise company offers more opportunity for immediate growth with a more matrixed organization.
yeah. Some people may want to know, have you seen any HR horror stories, should we say, in the industry that you'd
Sure.
be able to share?
Oh gosh, the sharing part, that's hard.
You don't have to name any businesses.
There you go. There you go. Of course I have. In fact, the entire HR community believes that we're all going to write a collective book about them all someday. We all talk about our books. Someday I'm going to write a book. We've got to write our books together because we've seen it all. Gosh, I'm trying to think. Most of mine are not suitable for sharing publicly, that I share with giggles with friends, and that I'd share privately with you, Nathan. We'll do that afterwards. But I think most of the eye-rolling HR issues are adults' behavior. Right, adults childing themselves down, the maturity factors. So one of the lines I tell regularly to people is when Sally comes into my office complaining that Billy's being mean. The first
Mm,
thing I ask is, well, what did Billy say when you talked to him about it?
yeah.
I already know Sally did not talk to Billy about it. Sally wants me to come fix her problems and go
Mm,
tell Billy that he'd better act right and stop behaving that way. But as soon as Sally understands, oh, yeah, I guess it was my responsibility. We're adults. I should at least be
yeah.
able to speak with Billy first and
Put
let
them
him
in the
know that
same
this thing
room.
is
Yeah.
bothering me, or this circumstance is bothering me. So there are probably my most prevalent examples. The biggest pile of HR examples in those HR stories are adults forgetting to behave like adults.
I've heard a few stories of that for sure on some Christmas do's and stuff from the
Oh, and there
industry
you
and
go.
stuff. We'll have to share them another time. But yeah, another question, I guess. I mean, how do you actually find working with multiple different businesses now at once? Because obviously you went from having 100% of your attention to data.world for a solid 4 years to maybe having 20% of your attention with Strike Ready, another 20% of your attention to another data business, 10% of your attention, to the founder of a brand new business. I mean, how do you actually go about diverting your attention from all of these different businesses and realizing, hey, this isn't actually one problem, this is multiple different issues going on?
Yes. And priority shuffling also, because it might be that of my multiple clients, one of them really has as my friend says, there really is such thing as an HR emergency. There's very rarely such thing as an engineering emergency or a marketing emergency, but there's such thing as an HR emergency. And if something is going on here, I from time to time will have to reprioritize, maybe shift meetings with other clients, et cetera, to be able to focus on that. If it's all one group, they understand, oh, I've got to go put out this fire in our collective organization. What I will say is that I'm either very fortunate to have great understanding clients. They're often in similar boats or have their own challenges. And at any given time, it could be any one of them that I'm focused on or have to reprioritize for. And so I think they respect that, and they respect each other as my clients and needing my time. So I'm lucky in that regard that it hasn't been a problem. That said, I do have to be really mindful of it. I have to be mindful of shifting. The reality is every organization has its own culture also. So I really have to be in sync with my organization. And I have to be mindful of my time and how I allocate my time. And I've changed my methodology a few times over the course of the last couple of years. I thought I was going to work in X client for the first half of Mondays and Thursdays, and this client, and it just does not operate that way at all whatsoever. So there are certainly throughout the week, I have specified time, meeting times and workshop times with different clients. But that is definitely one of the challenges, is time allocation. The bigger challenge is really making sure that I'm shifting my own perspective and kind of, okay, this is the strategy and the needs of this client right now, and they differ from this other client.
Yeah. How do you find working with founders who are obviously some of the busiest people on the planet? How do you find working with them?
That has been one of the most interesting things of this also. Nathan, back in the day, even 5 years ago, when people talk about being an executive coach, I had a lot of questions and probably a little bit of an eye roll. As I have moved into this consultative role, I would argue that probably about a third of what I'm doing is executive coaching.
Right.
And so I have a much better understanding of it because it's kind of come to me in that way. Working with founders is always interesting because, frankly, you're talking about their child, what they've built. And my job is to come in. It's very rarely do people call me because everything's functioning perfectly. So my job is to come in and say, okay, these are the parts of your baby that are ugly, right? These are the parts we need to fix. Got a bit of a hair lip there. We might need to surgically fix, right, kind of situation. And so there is a balance of being gentle, and also being assertive enough for them to understand the risks that they might be putting their company in, or the challenges they're creating for their own future, et cetera. And what I've learned is it's about guiding them there, and that really becomes kind of a coaching role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Interesting.
The good
Yeah,
news
for
is
sure.
I've worked for, well, I'll say if you go look at my LinkedIn, you'll see that I have worked for more startup companies than most founding CEOs or founding folks. And so I've had the opportunity to develop the experience and gain the respect. So
Yeah.
fortunate to be heard.
Awesome. Yeah, amazing. Well, it's been brilliant to connect today. Anyway, I really appreciate your time. If there's any data businesses or early security founders in my network that are looking for someone to maybe patch up some of the gaps in their initial HR issues, then Lisa's definitely going to be the person for that. So I'll tag a LinkedIn in this post anyway. Thanks so much for speaking, Lisa.
Thank you, Nathan. My team and I would be happy to talk to anyone in your circle. It is always a pleasure to hang out with you. Thanks so much for inviting me today.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.